everybody, and welcome to This Week in Cleantech. 15 minutes. It's all the time in the world we have to tell you the biggest stories in climate and clean energy this week. If I sound a little funny, it's because I'm coming at you from my dad's office in southern Michigan. I'm on vacation this week. My little brother's about to get married, but that doesn't mean I don't want to spend a few minutes with my buddy Mike Casey from Tigercomm. We also have a returning guest on the horn, Tim McDonnell from Semafor. I am Factor This content director, Paul Gerke. Thank you so much for joining us, guys, on the podcast. Today's Friday, August 22, 2025. How are you feeling today, Mike?
I am good, friend. And hey, I want to just dial our listeners into two things. First, Paul, I think is it not your birthday today?
Yeah, technically. 21 is my birthday. I appreciate the recognition, man.
All
Played
right, man.
a round of golf, got a little bit of a suntan. I don't know if it shows up on the podcast.
You're looking good. And then you and Katie, your wife, are expecting expansion to the family. Shortly after RE+.
We are.
Yeah? All right, congratulations.
Yeah, coming very soon. Baby girl in October, our first. So a lot to be excited about on this side of the podcast fence.
You and Colin Silver of SIA, our friend there, he and his wife Ellie also expecting shortly before RE+. So the Cleantech family is expanding. We want to wish them congratulations, friend. So
we are building an army, Mike Casey, one at a time.
We need it. And hey, we'll get details on the next episode, but we want to just remind everybody, we will be taping live from the Power Up stage at RE+. And if you're a listener and you're going to be there at the show, we would love to meet you. Just come on up and say hi, because we have a blast doing this, and we love meeting the folks who listen. So
yeah. Listeners always a huge important part of the show. You guys get shout outs almost every single week. If you have a story you want to talk about, if you got a little piece of commentary you want to throw on our shoulders, we're happy to lend a voice to you. paul.gerke@clearingevents.com is my email address. Mike, let's get into it. Story number one this week.
Claire Brown, the New York Times. Why can't the U.S. build 5-minute EV chargers, Paul?
That's a billion-dollar question, and then some. China, as you know, dominates the EV market, more than 70% of global manufacturing share in 2024. You may have heard two major Chinese EV companies have already announced a 5-minute charger, but car buyers in the U.S. won't have access to anything like that anytime soon. China's already pulled a generation or two ahead on technology in the EV space, and that might be putting it lightly. Very few Chinese-branded cars are sold in the U.S. because of tariffs. You'd have a real tough time getting your hand on the cool stuff that you see on TikTok. China treats EV charging stations more like critical infrastructure, the stuff that we pretend that it is, Mike Casey. Like the U.S. doing highway maintenance. They can easily build charging hubs directly into the grid, unlike the U.S. I've been reading a lot about the Chinese energy grid, Mike. I don't know if you saw the story that came out last week about how much overcapacity that they've got. It's like 2x everywhere you go. There are no capacity concerns, and the data center problem for them is not a problem. It's a sponge to soak up all that extra electricity.
Yep. Without policies that help transition away from gas-powered vehicles, domestic car companies just aren't incentivized enough to majorly invest in EVs. This is, as you know, a capital-intensive exercise in switching from internal combustion engines over to EVs. The administration just pulled back the $7,500 tax rebate for new EV purchases. It's unclear how much this will slow EV growth in the U.S., but here's what is not unclear. China invested up front in its charging network before there was even a market. They saw this coming, they planned for it, and now they pulled ahead and are leaving everyone else, including us, behind. Paul, story number two.
To the victors go the spoils, Mike. Story number two. Samini Sengupta and Brad Plumer from the New York Times titled, Will Oil Demand Peak Soon? Trump administration doesn't want to hear it. Mike, what was in this one?
The latest International Energy Agency, or IEA, forecasts have shown oil and gas demand could peak by the end of this decade as EV sales grow and the cost of solar and storage plummets. So Chris Wright, our fracker-in-chief at the Energy Secretary,
our buddy, yeah.
said that the projections are, quote, nonsensical, and threatened that the U.S. could withdraw from the IEA if it doesn't change the way it operates and produces facts. So we should note that someone, the federal official responsible for collecting U.S. employment data, was just fired after producing a report that dared to show weak hiring numbers. So this is an administration that's not hesitant to get rid of data they view as inconvenient and unfavorable. It's reminiscent of the story we had from Scott Waldman from E&E on back in June. The administration is scaling back climate research because it doesn't like its conclusions. But Bloomberg New Energy Finance and the oil companies like BP and Equinor also have projected a peak in oil use by around 2030. So it's not just the IEA, it's two major international oil companies that are doing that. The projected peak is demand is partly because China's appetite for oil is leveling off as they shift from oil to battery-powered transportation. Paul?
It has leveled off, hasn't it? Haven't they turned the corner? And now it's on the rest of us to sort of figure it out. Others like ExxonMobil critique the IEA forecast. They believe we'll continue to see more oil growth in coming decades. The Trump administration's plans this week to say, hey, no more solar, no more wind, I guess would in part accelerate oil development. We got to get into the fact that we can't get turbines where we need them in order to make use of that gas. They say this narrative could cause countries and companies to underinvest in oil and gas drilling. I don't know about that, Mike. I'm not sure that any time, anywhere we've ever been concerned about underinvestment in the fossil fuel lobby. But I digress. If demand doesn't fall, the lack of supply could lead to, quote, energy chaos, as OPEC puts it. Despite this criticism, many still support, like the IEA, like Dan Jorgensen, the European Union energy minister, who said, quote, the IEA is an important and globally recognized body and provides science-based data and analysis on energy security, global energy markets, energy technologies, and energy access. Mike, story 3.
Will Wade, Noreen Malik, Emma Sanchez, all from Bloomberg. They wrote, Texas shows how Trump's anti-green moves threaten a red economy, Paul. I like this story. I thought it was very interesting.
I do too, and if you're not paying close attention to what's happening in ERCOT this summer, you should be, because it's really interesting how batteries have changed the way that electricity is used in that market, which was running into a lot of problems, let's say, not that long ago. ERCOT says electricity usage may rise 62% in 2030 from its current record, which I think gets snapped every summer and a few times every summer. Data centers, crypto mining facilities, and factories plan to be built in Texas. Renewables slated to provide a lot of that power. 94%, in fact, of new power capacity added to the Texas grid since 2020 has come from either renewables or batteries. Texas has more clean energy and batteries than any other state now, including California, supplying more than 30% of its electricity. But the OBBB, the One Big Beautiful Bill, slashes tax credits for those type of projects starting in 2028, not only making them more expensive to build, but injecting uncertainty into that development space. And there have been executive orders since then that further complicate things. Texas officials have tried to encourage construction of natural gas, but cost uncertainties and that global turbine shortage, we bring it up every week on this show, Mike Casey, making it a challenge. The state's booming economy is at stake if it can't add more electricity, and they would be a canary in the coal mine for the rest of us too, Mike. What did you think of this?
I think that if Chris Wright had his way, he'd fire us both from the show, and then the shortage of turbines would disappear. Right?
You can't let facts get in the way of a good story, Mike.
No, if facts are not presented and they're not learned, they don't exist, Paul. Reality actually changes.
We'd have a lot less COVID if we stopped testing for COVID, Mike. I'm just saying.
It's the ideology over reality crowd. Okay, with the tax credit set to expire years early, residential ratepayers in Texas could pay about 23% more in 2035 than they would have without the bill. If Texas were its own country, its economy would be the 8th largest in the world. A big part of its success is cheap, affordable energy. But with this change, industrial consumers are going to see bills increase 54%, which could be a major problem for their competitiveness. I should say that our BFF, Secretary Wright, did say that the administration is going to get blamed for rising energy prices. Paul, our fourth story.
I'll keep my eyes on the inbox for our Christmas card from Secretary Wright. So hopefully there's a nice note in there and a picture of the family. Story number 4, Isabella O'Malley from the AP, titled Solar Panels That Fit on Your Balcony or Deck Are Gaining Traction in the U.S. What? Residential solar? Back from the dead, Mike Casey.
This is kind of cool. All right, so solar panels that plug into regular wall outlets have been popular in Europe for years. They're now gaining traction in the U.S. The systems are about the size of a door, and they can be mounted on the balcony of an apartment or in a backyard. This is especially appealing right now, considering rooftop solar tax credits are set to expire, and some homeowners can't afford the upfront cost of rooftop solar. One plug-in solar customer saw $35 savings per month on their electricity bill, and these smaller systems allow people to better manage where their energy comes from and what they pay. Paul?
So first off, utilities might oppose plug-in solar from the start, especially as it becomes more widely adopted stateside. For the obvious reasons, customers are buying less energy. Right now, though, Utah is the only state that's passed legislation that supports plug-in solar. The customer in this story spent $2,000 all in for two 400-watt panels, an inverter, a smart meter, and a circuit breaker. That's $2.50 per watt, very competitive with rooftop solar prices in the U.S. at the moment. Bright Saber, a nonprofit that advocates for plug-in solar, lobbying in other states for similar legislation. Mike, story number 5.
2, 1. Our last story is with returning guest Tim McDonnell of Semafor. He is on the Mount Rushmore of This Week in Cleantech guests. Tim, this is like your 5th time on the show of the last 2 years, huh?
What an honor it is, Mike. Thank you so much.
Friend, if this is your idea of an honor, then we need to hire you a life coach. I think you have really you've fallen low.
I could use it.
All right. And your story, Google wants to make AI's energy footprint a non-consideration, but it's not there yet. Man, this is, I want to get into this story because this is not only is AI's energy footprint a big deal, but Google's AI energy footprint is a big deal. So, Tim, if people haven't read this piece, which we want them to do, what is the big takeaway?
The takeaway is, there's a lot of talk about how much energy AI uses, and a lot of that, the numbers that people throw around are often sort of based on generalizations or estimates, different kind of ballpark figures that we try to come up with to capture what this footprint really is. But part of that is because a lot of the data from big tech companies is proprietary. They don't usually talk about the specific details too often. So what Google did here, which was very interesting, was to really kind of go under the hood of their own system. This is the Gemini AI app that you've probably seen in Gmail or when you do a Google search, and really try to give a very accurate representation of actually how much energy is used per Gemini query. And it's the first time they published data like this. One thing that's interesting is that they kind of came up with a new methodology for counting this figure. It's not quite as simple as it might seem. Another thing that's quite interesting here is that the figure is smaller than a lot of, pretty substantially smaller than a lot of the other estimates for AI models that we've seen come out. And the third thing that I just found very interesting with this is that what they found in their own energy use, when they tracked it over the last 12 months, was that it had decreased considerably by about 33 times. A decrease in energy use just in the last 12 months from things that they've been doing to improve their, the model itself, their hardware that they're using, and other steps. So, the interesting thing here is it's a kind of it's a little bit of a good news story in that the sort of per query energy use is maybe smaller than what people would expect. They compare it to being roughly equivalent to watching about 9 seconds of television, which is just sort of like a
really wow.
Yeah, that's what they say. I mean, I think the purpose of that analogy is to just try to make you think a little bit about like the value that you're getting from this. I mean, because people talk about AI uses a lot of energy, and certainly does, but if the AI is performing some very important social function or is very useful to you in some way, then maybe that's energy that is worthwhile. So you could think about, how much value do you get out of watching 9 seconds of TV versus an AI query, and that's just a value judgment that people can have to make for themselves. But I think that's where they're sort of going with that analogy. So it's a very interesting study here.
Tim, I've been seeing a lot of stuff in my feeds the last few days about the AI bubble, and it's proclivity to burst sometime soon. Meta putting a freeze on hiring, some revised projections. ChatGPT 5 maybe didn't go the way that everyone wanted it to go. And well, we'll just bet on the next one. But at one point, there won't be a next one if the money is not there and the infrastructure is not there. Should we be worried about the potential of an AI bubble bursting? And what sort of impact do you think that would have from your reporting on the larger energy space, Tim?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think we are sort of, starting to, get into the nitty gritty of the future of, what is the real actual lived sort of energy footprint of this technology, and getting more into the lived experience of that rather than these big picture forecasts. One thing that's interesting with the energy question, which goes, I think, to the question you're asking, is the more energy efficient that AI becomes, on one hand, maybe that's a good thing because we're, obviously using less energy per query. On the other hand, there's this thing called the Jevons paradox that if it becomes more efficient, then you use more of it, and then total energy consumption goes up. So, if we're in an AI sort of bubble, and it turns out that all of this stuff is a lot less useful, or gets used a lot less than maybe we think it will be in the future. Maybe that might be positive in terms of energy consumption. I think this is really a question that is very, very relevant for power companies, utilities, manufacturers of energy hardware like Mitsubishi or GE Vernova, the companies that make gas turbines and other stuff like that, because they're all looking at like these big power demand forecasts of the future and thinking, what should we be spending capital on to catch up with that? And I know from conversations I've had with those companies that they're still really uncertain about, should we really be scaling up the grid or gas turbine manufacturing or other kind of elements of the energy market to satisfy what we think the future demand for AI is going to be, because the energy use per query could be something completely different. The total volume of queries and sort of the general use of AI could be something totally different from what we imagine. It could be a lot smaller. So, I think there's a lot of companies that are grappling with, are we going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars in sort of anticipating what that big demand boom might be, but we don't really know. And so this Google study, I think, just sort of starts to interrogate that a bit more and give some transparency and some new numbers into that conversation. And I should just note, it's an important part of this that Google's the use of Gemini, this AI service, has been skyrocketing. It's across all of Google's products and services now. So even though the per query energy use is maybe lower than what we thought, Google's total carbon footprint is growing rapidly. They just had a report on this from a couple of months ago that it's been growing very quickly in the last. Their total carbon footprint has been growing very quickly in the last few years because of these data centers and AI services like Gemini. So in aggregate, it's still kind of a big problem, and the company's moving in the opposite direction of where it would like to be in terms of reaching net zero in the next coming years.
A related question, I just learned this week that a considerable amount of AI search is done without the AIs scraping the internet for that search. And the rationale is that it saves them money, but it also dawned on me that it also lowers their power bill. Like, they don't have to use as much power, and it's by almost every account, the growth of AI is going to be ahead of the growth of the grid's ability to deliver power. It seems like there's a lot that these companies know they can do or will learn that they can do to make AI's energy demand go lower. Do you get a sense they're paying much attention to that right now? Because I've heard mixed things.
I mean, I heard directly from Google this week that they part of their reason for wanting to do this study was so that they could have a specific, energy per query benchmark that they set for themselves internally to sort of judge their engineers against and as a goal to work against, because they want to make that a metric that they are really working to correct. And and it's not just a PR thing. I think to your point, there's a very real sense in which the energy capacity becomes a constraint on what these models are sort of able to do, or how much we can deploy them, and the sort of constraint of bits, and the sort of programming constraint is going to be overtaken by physics and atoms and electrons on the grid, is going to become a real problem. So the whole idea of driving down this energy consumption, it's sort of part of the climate goals. It's part of a maybe public facing thing, but I think really what it is at the heart for a company like Google is that the only way they're going to physically be able to deploy something like Gemini at the scale that they are envisioning wanting to deploy it is by solving this energy problem, because they're going to run into a real physics constraint if they don't otherwise. So I think that's really at the heart of what's going on here.
Well, Paul, we're just about out of time. Before we wrap, let's go to our Cleantecher of the week.
Let's do it. Cleantecher of the week. Guy Nicholson, head of zero carbon grid solutions at Statkraft, which is a Norwegian startup you may have heard of, created a 100-ton spinning machine, turns at 3,000 rotations per minute to help stop blackouts as more cheap solar power is added to the grid. Inertia, Mike. It can help absorb excess power if there's too much, or inject power into the grid if there's too little. Akshat Rathi covered this story in a Bloomberg piece. Guy was the spokesperson in that story. Congratulations, our Cleantecher of the week, Mr. Nicholson.
I want to give a shout out to our terrific producer, Brian Mendez, and to Alex Peterson and Claire Quirin for helping us identify this week's stories.
And Mr. McDonnell from Semafor for joining us this week on This Week in Clean Tech. Please subscribe, leave feedback, share your story suggestions, and we'll see you next time.
Take care, Paul.